my name is Lee St. James, and I am the Managing Director of the Urban Robotics Foundation. I'll introduce our panelists in a few moments, along with our Executive Director, Bern Grush, who will be the moderator for today's session. Please feel free to put on your camera and network with other participants using the chat, but we do ask you to keep your audio on mute, please. You're also able to use the chat to answer any questions that you have for the panelists. We'll have an opportunity to do some interactive Q&A with the audience later on, and you can use the speaker view or gallery view, whichever you prefer. Now, since more than half of the audience is new to the Urban Robotics Foundation, it will take a few moments before the panel discussion begins to provide a brief overview of what we do. And at the end of today's session, I'll invite you to continue your involvement with us by joining as a member or by purchasing our discovery guide and or attending a workshop coming up. So let me begin. I'll just share my screen. And yes, you are in the right place in terms of being the webinar, Social Acceptance of Public Area Mobile Robots, Lessons in Leadership. So the webinar is focused on one of the core challenges that we are seeking to address at the Urban Robotics Foundation: how to ensure social acceptance and deployment readiness for new technologies like public area mobile robots. We focus on PMRs and how this technology impacts people who are bystanders or pedestrians, but many of the lessons apply more broadly to other technologies as well. As a nonprofit organization, our solution is to build a global network of people focused on learning how PMRs can contribute to improved livability in urban ecosystems. We bring stakeholders together on webinars and publish guidebooks. We also offer workshops and advisory services. Bern is the global lead for drafting the new open standard ISO 4448, and members have an opportunity to help shape that new standard while it is being written. If you haven't already downloaded a free copy of the executive guide, which was first published in January, I will put a link in the chat later this session. And our discovery guide will be available for purchase in a few weeks. The project guide will be published later in the year. So I'm now going to open a poll for our audience to help our speakers understand who we have gathered today. Members of URF are typically in one of the stakeholder groups shown here. And so this is really what the poll is all about. Let me just, hey, I think we've had most people respond now. I'm going to end that poll for now, and I'm going to share the results. And so let's just see here. So we have robot technology provider, fleet operator, and researcher are the two most prominent options here. And then we have an advisor and urban traffic planning consultant. Okay. Surprisingly to me, we don't have too many government people joining yet, or public facility operators, but I think we have, they may be just joining us a little bit later. So we are now about to introduce our panelists. I'm very thrilled to have with us today Councillor Helen Hayden from Leeds in the UK, where she is the City Council's executive member for sustainable development and infrastructure, and it's been instrumental in the pilot projects, or I'm not sure if that's the right term, but Lisa, you can correct me, that Starship has been doing in Leeds. And we have Lisa Johnson, Vice President of Global Public Affairs at Starship Technologies. You can read more about their bios on our website, and I'll put the link to their LinkedIn profiles in the chat if you want to connect with them later. I'm now going to hand it over to Bern Grush, Executive Director of URF, to start the panel discussion now.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you for everybody for joining us today. And especially thank you, Helen and Lisa, for joining us afternoon in your time, of course. Some of us are at morning, but good afternoon. So I'm going to open with some questions to each and both of you. And after that, we'll take some questions from the audience. So that for the next 20 minutes, it'll be with you guys. So Helen, let me start with you. And this is from your perspective of sustainable development and infrastructure. What were your initial thoughts when it became apparent that Leeds would be considering delivery robots in your city? And tell us what you were expecting or hoping for. What were you looking for in terms of economic or environmental benefits? You know, anything of your thoughts there.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the panel today. I'm really excited. It's initially I was intrigued, excited, because we all are, but I am particularly ambitious for Leeds. But there was a lot of trepidation as well about bringing this new technology to the streets of Leeds, particularly because it would be on the pavements, and that did raise quite a few concerns. So my main concern was around the fact that Leeds has evolved over the last 200 to 250 years. It's not as old as some of our nearby cities such as York, but it's not a pre-planned city. It's not planned as a city. So therefore, technology doesn't fit into it as well as somewhere like Milton Keynes, which was a planned town and then city. So I was particularly nervous about the width of our pavements and the interactions between the robots and particularly people with disabilities and partially sighted or visually impaired people particularly. But I was really excited as well about taking away that last mile car journey. In the pandemic, we saw a huge rise in the number of deliveries to people's homes, mainly because people couldn't leave their homes often, and delivery was the way. But that last mile is particularly high carbon emissions and also air quality as well. Is badly affected by that last mile journey. So I was really keen to see the benefits in both air quality and carbon emissions there. The third concern was around the economic benefits, but particularly job losses. And there was some sounding from colleagues and other people around Leeds that I spoke to that those delivery drivers would lose their jobs. But researchers found that actually more jobs are created and people actually employ more people because there's more deliveries, and therefore the robots will need servicing and packing and all the rest. And I was hopeful that the co-op, who are our partners, would see good economic benefits.
Thanks, Helen. This is very interesting about the actual increase in jobs as we take away, as we add these kinds of delivery systems. Lisa, let me ask you, I know you've been involved in a large number of delivery robot deployments, both in cities and campuses. What is your, and I know, and again, these have been in lots of cities, not just in the UK. There's been a few in the UK, but there's also in Finland and Germany and so on. So tell us about your role so our audience can understand better issues regarding public affairs and government relationships, which is your work.
Absolutely, and great to be here. Love to see everyone. I do apologise. I've got a little bit of a croaky voice. I've got the cold that's going around. Yeah, so it's a little bit different depending on where you go. So working in public affairs in a role like this, and I'm sure some of the people here are from the industry know this, it's a little bit different than it might be in a traditional industry. So we work really closely with both local government and national government, but kind of in a two-pronged way. So we'll work with local government to look at how can we sensitively introduce new technology to communities in a way that benefits everybody involved. Because like Helen said, when you go to a new local area, it's sometimes the case that people have never seen one of these robots before. So you've got to deal with that in a sensitive way. You can't just say, hey guys, you're getting robots now, deal with it. There's a lot of work that needs to go into it, especially in a city like Leeds, as Helen says, that has grown over hundreds of years. It doesn't have always big, wide pavements. And we're really confident as a company that we can navigate those situations, but it's also very important that local politicians, local officials, and local residents are confident about that too. And that is a big part of the work that we do. And tackling those questions head on. So as Helen said, people worry that new technology, because a lot of the headlines that you see too, takes jobs. And we understand that and we're sensitive to that. So we ask those questions of our customers. And for us, the figures show that the vast majority of what we do takes cars off the roads. It's people who get home from work, they've maybe got a couple of kids, they need top-up shopping. And the choice for them is, do we not have the thing? Or do we get in the car and go to the store? Which isn't good for carbon emissions or people's well-being or just that sense of calm and trying to get things done after work. But also we're in a post-pandemic world where people expect often relatively low basket values of things and they expect them very quickly. And as in a society and an economy, we need to think, how do we deal with that? And that's where Starship comes in, because we fill that niche in the market where is it truly ethically and sustainably viable to deliver that amount of goods with a human and everybody in the supply chain benefit? So we tackle those questions head on at a local level and really work with communities, older people's groups, disability charities to make people comfortable. And that's different depending where you go, because US campuses are pre-planned, often big wide open spaces, and it's a much easier operating environment than Helen was talking about in some older cities in the UK. So that makes a difference about how you approach these things. But then my job also covers national government. So speaking to ministers and national officials about how they make laws to suit the sort of work that we do. So we're still waiting on a regulatory framework in the UK, but in places like Estonia and Finland, in over half of all US states, we have that kind of framework in place. And we proactively work with regulators, sharing data, experience, case studies to help them come to a view about how they best want to regulate pavement robots and also obviously other sorts of autonomous vehicles.
Thanks. You know, what I'm hearing from both of you is that most of these delivery trips are replacing automotive trips as opposed to replacing bicycle trips or walking trips. Let me ask Helen, to you. So during the decision process leading up to this, was there a sort of a multi-departmental consultation, a multi-departmental issue, or was this just a single department decision about how you would bring these in and permit them into Leeds? And if there was multi-departments, how was that coordination handled?
It was mainly highways because they are responsible for the statutory department responsible for the pathways and the roadways. But I couldn't have done anything without the support of the leader. So what Starship did was brought a robot into the office, and they are so cute that they just won everybody over, to be honest. And
everybody loves the robots.
Absolutely, especially when they sing to you. So yeah, our leader, Councillor Lewis, was he was easily won over. And to be honest, because of the lack of regulatory framework in the UK, we did it as a trial. But we were very, as Lisa said, very keen to work with disability groups, with those people in those focus groups. Leeds University helped us out with that. And I also engaged with my colleague, Councillor Ritchie, who is our disability champion. And he went along to some, if not all, of the different sessions that Leeds University and Starship ran with different groups of people with lived experience. And so we coordinated. So the officer, Rupert, who oversaw most of this work, and he also went down to Cambridgeshire. I wouldn't allow him to go to Milton Keynes, as for reasons I mentioned earlier. Went to Cambridgeshire, which also, has evolved over the last few hundred years, and did a lot of research and backs, and then we started it as a trial. To be honest, they're all still trials officially at the moment, just because we have that lack, and I'm very jealous of other areas that do have that regulatory. But the other thing that I was very keen on is working with a responsible, reputable partner such as Starship that really, got to know Leeds and work with people who know Leeds and have really good communication skills as well.
So in the end, and I'm not sure who wants to answer this, but in the end, you had some decision criteria you will deploy. I know you don't deploy everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about where you did deploy? What was your criteria for choosing where you did deploy? I'm not sure who wants to answer that, but
I'll let Lisa go first, because it was mainly from Starship's end first, and then they consulted with me. So yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's a really important consideration, really. And so and I'll follow up on one of the things Helen said there too. It's because Starship isn't a retailer. We move stuff, we don't have stuff. So in some ways, it's like a tripartite agreement, really. So we need a retail partner that we work with who wants to move their things around with a logistics solution. And then we work with authorities. In the UK, that's how we do it. In Finland, it's much different because of the national regulatory framework. So in Finland, we work with our partner, S Group. That's the largest retailer in Finland, also a co-op. And we kind of let the local authorities know that we're coming, but we don't have to do the same level of sort of engagement and sort of official engagement in the same way that we did in Leeds. And US campuses obviously different again, because they're private entities by and large. We do work with the cities, especially looking at state laws. We do work with the cities because obviously you use the roads around the campuses and things like that. So it really depends on where you're going. We tend not to work in very close, densely populated city centres because our robots behave like cautious pedestrians. And if you're doing this sort of quick commerce, last mile delivery, if the robot's encountering somebody every sort of 2 paces, the robot's going to be super cautious and keep stopping. It's going to take a very long time for your hot food or for your groceries to arrive. So for us, we look at the infrastructure, we look at the crossings, we look at who the partner is, we look at where local authorities are happy for us to go, and where there could be problem areas. You know, local authorities know their areas best. And that comes on to the point I just wanted to come back with Helen, is that you've got to listen. As a company that's doing something that's never been done and you're doing it for the first time, you can have all the engagement you want in the world, but unless you take that engagement back and actually do something with it as a company, it doesn't matter, because people think you've paid lip service to it. So on mobility devices, for example, we've had to invest a lot of time and resource on it, and it's the right thing to do. It makes good business sense as well, because the communities that we operate in are also our customers. So we don't want to turn up somewhere and create ill will and make people feel angry that we're there. We want people to love us, and I think we have created that in a lot of places. But so with mobility devices are an example, we've taught the robots to understand what a mobility device is. It takes thousands of encounters for the robots to like understand this, and we've done it. And so now we can program robot behavior that is different when the robots see a mobility device than maybe a human or some other street furniture. But that's through, as Helen said, talking to people with lived experience. Because if you've not got somebody who experiences that day-to-day building the kit, then you need to take into account that experience as well.
Thanks. Helen, do you want to add to that?
Yes. So when it came back, so not all of Leeds is suitable. We have many areas that the pavements are too small. And so when Starship came to us initially with the 2 trials, they were both in North Leeds with the right kind of pavements and things like that. But also Lisa and her team, and we were very keen that we had a good socio-economic mix of people. So it did include an area of quite high deprivation within what is normally considered North Leeds, and I'm going to use the colloquialism, but it's one of our poshest areas. So where I am in East Leeds, I got castigated on our family's WhatsApp group when, oh, well, H, you will never bring them here, will you, to East Leeds, because there'll be kids traveling on them going to school and things like that. So there was a perception that we'd gone particularly into a more affluent area of Leeds for those reasons. It wasn't. It was a good mix of people, actually. It was a good mix of demographics, and the conditions were right with 2 co-ops, and the highways and footpaths were right. So because all those boxes were ticked, I agreed. And then the other trials, we did come into East Leeds, so they are very close to where my family and I live, and they proved even more popular. And we've gone out to an ex-mining village stroke town, which is actually fairly separate from Leeds, and again very different conditions, a different type of community, and worked really, really well, because Starship and ourselves did the right kind of engagement with people, and people are really excited about them coming and seeing them going into different communities of Leeds, because we are one city but it's made up of different communities, is really exciting to people. And now people are just emailing and getting in contact saying, when can we have robots here, please?
So I can really see there's a lot of community thinking in both of your responses. And considering community thinking, what about the disability community? I know that's a specific interest in in almost any city. It certainly was here in Toronto. And Lisa, I understand that Starship does something, and I don't really understand fully what it is, with recognizing white canes as well. So anything you can talk about disability community be helpful for either of you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to us. We do things with communities, not to them. And that's kind of an important principle about how we engage. So we have an accessibility advisory panel that's made up of different national charities, and someone from the University of Leeds is on there. And it helps us to be able to get that lived experience, to understand what our priorities should be when we're looking at accessibility issues. And as I said, mobility devices, that was a key one, because we are able to deal, if it's a narrow pathway, for example, and a mobility device and a robot are both coming towards each other, we are able to deal with that situation, but it's about letting people know how we'll deal with it. So now when the robot recognizes a mobility device and we're in that situation, it'll stop, it'll say, hi, we're in a tricky situation, a human's coming along to help, because we have remote assistants that act as a backup function that can assist the autonomy of the robot when we need to. So we built that into it. Now, the white canes issue is a really difficult one, and we're working on it at the moment with the Royal National Institute for Blind People, with Wakefield District Sight Aid, just down the road from Helen. And what we're doing is we're trying to teach the robots, in the same way that we talked about the mobility devices, we're trying to teach the robots how to recognize white canes and that people could be using. Now, it's not a fix-all in a way, because there are long canes, there are short canes, there are canes that are used just to signify that people do have low vision or sight loss. So it's very difficult, and canes are really thin. So just on a very practical basis, canes are very thin. So if you're a little robot to spot them from quite a distance, you've got to do a lot of work on that. And we're putting a lot of work into it. We think we'll be the first to do it. And we've been going out with test groups of people who are cane users who've been working with us to help teach the robots. And our autonomous driving team are working really hard on that at the moment. So yeah, it's just really important. I think, again, it comes back to what I was saying about it being the right thing to do, but also an important business need. And regulatory wise, people quite rightly say, well, what have you done to ensure that it's not just about you serving people who've got a disability, and actually about a quarter of our customers tell us they have a disability or live with someone who does. It's not just about serving that community, it's about making sure that you operate safely and in a way that people aren't nervous about for the rest of the community that are disabled as well. So it's an ongoing piece of work. That's not going to be finished by the time, every time we get, take one thing off the list, we'll start on the next one. So it's going to be an ongoing piece of work as long as the robots are developing.
Thanks. Thank you. That's I find that in my opinion, the single most important aspect is how we serve and help and certainly be protective of that and considerate of that community. I want to ask one more question. We're going to break in a few minutes with back to Lee before we come back to the audience questions and so forth. But Helen, I want to ask you, and you touched on this a little bit, but there's a regulatory framework, and it differs from country to country. There's a regulatory framework at national level, and that's quite often absent. As for example, it's not absent in Japan or Estonia, but it is absent in many other countries. And some countries have like a state or a provincial level of regulation. That happens to be the case in the US and a couple of other places. What is your circumstance? What do you think ought to be handled at the federal level, and what do you think ought to stay with the municipal level? And how has that worked out so far?
We don't have a specific regulation in the UK, which is. We have devolved powers, and some devolved powers, maybe at West Yorkshire level, and definitely at the Scottish and Welsh levels and Northern Ireland. But we're desperate for UK regulation, and that has to come from central government, and they are very interested. So Lisa and I have hosted ministerial visits to our area of Leeds, just up the road from where I am now, both ministers and shadow ministers who have a responsibility for this kind of transportation, and they're very interested. As a exec member on a local authority, and a big local authority, I very much need that regulation. That's why we're keeping it as a trial. It will put some local authorities off having them in their cities, because you are taking the risk, and that's why we're keeping it as a trial. In my opinion, it's very, very low risk, because we're working with Starship and the co-op, and they're both trusted and organisations, and we've done all that community work, and we continue to do it. But it will make some people very nervous. So very much need it at a central government level. And then what we need then, which more or less happens when it comes to highways generally, is that we will take those regulations and see how it fits with Leeds. So we wouldn't, if we had blanket regulations, we wouldn't apply it everywhere, because not everywhere in Leeds would be suitable for these automotive delivery devices. So we'll take that regulation, but we very much need that to lend that security.
Perfect, thanks. We just have like two more minutes left in this session, in this part of the session. Lisa, do you want to add to that? Because you've got to have experience with multiple countries and multiple levels. Can you add quickly to that just in 2 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a national framework that gives local authorities the confidence that they can innovate. It shouldn't be a free-for-all, because it's kind of what you guys talk about at URF quite broadly, Ben, to be honest, is what happens when there are lots of companies doing this? We're the first, and we're actually investing lots in doing this right. But what if a company comes along that isn't the first, isn't the best, doesn't want to invest in doing this right? There's nothing stopping that happening either. And if something goes wrong, then that's bad for the entire sector. So we desperately, in each country, need to see that regulation, but there needs to be an element of local decision making, because local authorities know best. In the UK, that is. I think in places where it's much more spread out, where population density is lower, it's slightly different. And again, on private land, it's completely different. Again, we serve industrial sites and private universities. So it's kind of horses for courses. The UK is a very old country with very old institutions and with very old infrastructure in a lot of places, which is very different to operating in somewhere like Estonia or Finland, with much bigger, wider open spaces and a lower population density. So horses for courses. In the UK, it's definitely got to be a mix of national regulation and with local decision-making powers.
Thanks so much. I want to ask the audience, put your questions in the chat. What's going to happen now is I'm going to turn this over to Lee for the next little while. It's going to be Q&A from the audience, and I'm going to come back toward the end, and I want to ask a critical wrap-up question of our panelists, Helen and Lisa. But Lee, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much. And I just want to make people aware that we have a special thank you for being on the webinar today. And so the first 15 people to sign up for our discovery workshop, we have 2 of them scheduled right now. Just one of them's on our website right now, which is like a pilot project for the workshop. So March 21st. If you can't make that date, we're also hosting one on April 16th. And that is to basically take the work of the executive guide and go dive into some more use cases and really help prepare you for how you might deploy these robots. So we're offering a free copy of the discovery guide, which is $150 value. So we'll be publishing that book just before the first discovery workshop. And I will put that hot link into the chat. But that's our special offer. And now during the questions, I'm going to go back up. And the first question I have here, I think this is more for Lisa, but maybe Helen, you have a point of view on this as well. It's where are jobs created for manufacturing or repair of the robots?
So Starship's an Estonian company. Our founders are Ati Heinle and Janis Friis, who are 2 of the founding engineers behind Skype. So our parts come from kind of about 80 countries. We've got a lot of kit that goes into building these robots. But the bulk of our manufacturing project is in Estonia, where Ati and his team are in Tallinn. In the UK, we have hubs in different places. So in the UK, for example, we've got robot technicians who fix the robots and make sure they're all okay. Hubs in Milton Keynes and technicians all over the place. Same in the US, you need to make sure the robots are serviced and that there are people there to look after them. And also, there's loads of other jobs that go into delivering a company like this. So I'm not building the robots, but I'm employed by Starship up in Leeds with our stakeholder manager. We've got a whole bunch of account managers, communications, marketing specialists. So we're global, basically. We've got lots of jobs based all over the world, but our manufacturing process is where our founder is in Estonia.
Wonderful, thank you. And Helen, any other thoughts in terms of job creation that come along with this type of technology?
Well, I can only comment on what I've learned from our co-op partners, and the fact that the footfall has increased, as well as the number of deliveries, and they have quite a comprehensive offer. So they are taking on more people, they are busier, and they are taking on more people. So that only has to be good.
Very good.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, guys. Actually, it's a really good point in terms of one of the things we speak to with our stores, and this is, I've not spoken to other stores actually in other countries, most of the UK ones, is that because where we operate is not a city centre, like in the former mining town that Helen mentioned, Kippax, there is no delivery infrastructure there, right? So people aren't getting their stuff delivered before we're there, because a city centre human's not going to go the 30-minute ride to deliver £10 worth of shopping out in the suburbs. So it underpins the bricks and mortar operation of community stores, which is a tough time in retail at the moment. And community stores are starting to do more and more things, such as take in packages and do some things that post offices might traditionally have done. So it's not just about the jobs that we create, it's also about that sort of underpinning the bricks and mortar operation of community-based stores too, which we found from our partners is really important.
Wonderful. The next question is for you, Lisa, and it's from Peter Sosnin. Says, you were saying that robots help reduce the amount of car rides, but as robots mostly work on pavements and mostly deliver in the last mile zone, don't they compete more with bikes than cars?
Not that we found, honestly. Like in terms of space, we use similar spaces, I guess, to bikes, but most bikes will tend to be in bike lanes or on the roads. They're not really on the pavements or supposed to be really. So if for space-wise, we don't really find it to be much of a problem. We only cross bike lanes in the same way that we would a road. And our customer surveys tell us no, there is a small proportion of people that would have biked to the store. Like we can't pretend no one would have walked and no one would have taken their bike. Like there is a proportion of people who would have done that. The proportion of people who would have done that tends to be higher the closer the delivery area is to the city centre. And the sort of places that Helen's talking about, the vast majority are people who would have got in their cars.
Okay, great. I'm going to put in a little plug here for a talk that Bern gave back in November to the Global E-Bike Conference, where it really talked about the collaborative opportunity for companies. I think, I don't know if it was FedEx or Purelator, you can tell me which, what courier company, but where they're using e-bikes, but they're also using, delivery robots. So that's kind of an interesting, it's cooperation, not necessarily competition. The next, I can put that blog post in our chat for if anybody wants to check on that event that we participate in. Clinton Andrews has a question. What is the relationship between sidewalk delivery robots and the myriad semi-intelligent micromobility variants such as e-scooters that have appeared on many city streets in recent years? Should there be one roadway design standard for all and one legal liability regime?
Shall I take that? Well, e-scooters are not legal in the UK. There are some cities, quite a number of cities, who are on a trial with e-scooters. That doesn't mean to say we haven't got e-scooters in in and around our city. And I mean, the law says that you can ride them, but only on private land. So that's another headache in terms of not having set regulation. So e-scooters are not legally allowed on the pavements. I envisage that they would, when regulation does come in, that they would actually be in cycle lanes or on the sides of roads, where bicycles are and e-bikes are, and the rest. So it's I can't see the robots competing. Well, they shouldn't be competing with e-scooters because e-scooters should not be on our pavements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a big frustration around this one because, I mean, what's the big difference? It's humans. And, I love humans. I've got friends who are humans. But the main difference here is humans, right? We're 99% autonomous. And the robots can only, we use bounded autonomy. So the robots can only go, they're autonomous, but they can only go within the confines that we set for them. And they can only go at the top speed that we've given them. And as a company, if there's something not working, we can say, well, robots don't go there anymore. We're taking you away from that place. And they're not made to be moved by humans. In fact, we take great care to make sure that robots can't be moved by humans when they shouldn't be. So it is the big difference, and it's the big regulatory discussion we come up quite a lot. Are our robots regulated under micromobility laws in the same way that e-scooters can and probably will be? Are they regulated under autonomous vehicle laws that are mostly concerned with how road use happens, which we don't really think we're either of those things. But so then where do you fit? And Finland have managed to come up with a good solution. So have Estonia, Japan. We are somewhere in the middle, because with something like, we call it a personal delivery device is how we would define our robot. With something like a personal delivery device, you do need to make sure there are some rules about where it can move, but you also need to make sure that the autonomous system is safe and works. And so it fits somewhere in the middle of those things, right? And that it's insured. I mean, that's the other thing as well.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to flag something for our audience. If you haven't read the executive guide yet, there is a section where we talk about the status of e-scooter regulation and how we might be able to learn from that. So I just wanted to mention that for anybody who might be interested in just reviewing that section or getting to read it the first time. Stephen Sutherland has a question here. Are there any standardized tests operated in the municipalities? What are the required certifications, if any?
Not in
It's
ours.
not certifications as such. Yeah, I mean, I think there's different specifications. So in different areas, there'll be size, weight, speed restrictions. There will be the way that you engage with traffic will be regulated. The way that you're insured will be regulated. I'm not aware. I'd have to check in different US states because there's lots of them. If there is a very specific certification that we need to go through, the UK are looking at that in terms of vehicle type classification. But it appears that will actually just mostly be for larger roadworthy vehicles rather than personal delivery devices. So no, and the way that a lot of countries are sort of regulating it is looking at it and saying, here's how we want you to behave and what the outcome of this regulation is that we want to happen. So we're happy for you to be here, but we want you to be safe, to be insured, and we want you to behave in a certain way and to not sort of to be a certain size or specification as they have in Finland with sort of the width and height regulations, rather than sort of really getting under the hood of some of this stuff.
Okay, great. Next question is from Aaron Skiles. A question regarding community perception and acceptance. Lisa mentioned the need for timely delivery for prepared food, which involves speed and pathways. How do you manage the community perception of a safe speed for a pavement or sidewalk traversing robot versus the capabilities of the technology to travel safely, i.e. the technology could go faster and remain safe, but there are socially accepted speed limits on pavement or sidewalk?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Our robots can go much faster than they do. So that's, you know, that actually fits with, we could get places probably much quicker, but is that safe? Safety is absolutely the #1 priority in everything that we do, because everything that we do is based on that fundamental principle that we're safe doing what we do. That's why it's taken us 10 years to get where we are. And we've done 6 million deliveries. When we first started out on those deliveries, we had someone walking behind the robot with a control handling it while it was still learning. Since then, we've done 11 million kilometers and we've learned with every one of those kilometers. So it's the safety aspect of this is key. There are some areas where it will be okay to go a little bit faster because there's no one around, there's a big wide pavement and the robot knows there's no traffic and it's all fine. But you can't do that unless you are absolutely sure that your technology understands that situation. So, and in most places we're capped speed anyway, we're around sort of 6-7 miles per hour. We cap our speed. But the robot's a hyper cautious pedestrian. It's got a 360 view of the world that we call a bubble of awareness. And it can see if something's near it, and its job is not to get too close to things. So if it can see that something's coming towards it, if it's a vehicle, its time of flight cameras tell how quickly the speed is of the thing that's coming towards it, and it calculates what the best thing to do in that situation. So you're very unlikely to see a robot speeding down a high street, weaving through pushchairs and oncoming traffic in that way. And I think the work that you do with the community as well is kind of, people get used to it very quickly. That's something that I didn't expect when I came into this role. People embrace the robots. They treat them like little toddlers or pets, kind of talk to them and help them cross the road if they're waiting for to push the button. So the robots are very respectful. They're very polite. They'll say, excuse me, or if you're blocking their path, they'll very politely ask you to move. So it's about building not just the safety and the autonomy into it, but how you behave around humans as well. When you're practically operating on a day-to-day basis, it is really surprising how quickly people get used to it.
If I could just add to that as well, because that one thing the first trial threw up was that we have what we call zebra crossings, which are not controlled by lights. So if drivers see a pedestrian waiting at the zebra crossing, they have to stop. So the robot would approach the zebra crossing and the traffic would stop to let it across, but the robot's trained to only move if there's no cars there. So we had to educate drivers in Leeds, if they were driving, to just keep going if there isn't a human being at the zebra crossing and not to wait and be polite. But that's because people just really embrace them. And that's really, that point about the communities embracing them has really worked in the favour of any damage or vandalism that might, because, you know, some young people, particularly young people, I don't know what, you know, I was a teacher for 16 years. I love teenagers. They're my favourite people, but it's, you know, like to take the flags off them or have a bit of a laugh with them. And so what I saw in my local Facebook groups was, if these are your kids, have a word, because they're they're messing with our robots. And there's suddenly, we have a colloquialism in Leeds where, you know, if you're particularly fond of somebody, you'll call them our Lisa, for example. So they're our robots, and you know, they'll give them names and things like that. But that's really important in terms of keeping the robot safe as well, and making sure that they can do what they're designed to do.
That's great. Bern, that brings up the question I think you had for Lisa about her experience with stolen or vandalized robots. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I've been saying this to Bern.
Yes.
It's the number one question we get asked. Won't people steal them? And especially as Helen said, we actually go to a complete mix of areas in terms of socioeconomic status. So people didn't think that we could do it. We firmly believe tech is for everybody. It's not just for a privileged few. There's an equality issue here in terms of who benefits from tech, and also who gets involved in tech. Because if you can't see things, you don't be things. And so you need to be able to show everybody that this is for them. So we've gone, and it's been at Helen's insistence in Leeds, is that we went to places that we didn't initially consider, in all honesty. And it's been absolutely wonderful. It's been hugely successful, and the robots have embraced it. And as my mum would have said, because she's not too far from where Helen comes from, well, they'll nick it round here. You can't have out, which basically means someone will steal it if you're not allowed to have anything nice. And it's just not true. It's just not true. In so many of the places where we operate, people have that perception when we go in. I mean, firstly, it's got 12 cameras. So you're not going to be wanting to mess with it. It screams if you pick it up. It's actually quite heavy. Like, it's 30 kilograms. So it's not going to hurt you if it's on its journey and it accidentally bumps something. But it's also not easy to just put under your arm and take away. And if you did get into it, you're probably going to get some milk and eggs and bananas and maybe a newspaper. So it's not really worth it. So there's that social acceptance side of it. People police it for us anyway. Get off that robot, you leave it alone. But it's also quite difficult to mess with, truthfully. So we just don't have many instances of it at all. And honestly, as well, I've been surprised by that. But it's a very common question. It just doesn't happen.
Great. Well, that's a good segue to the next question. This is from Sean Walling. He says, given the focus on secure and convenient delivery, how do you see solutions like smart mailboxes and parcel lockers complementing autonomous delivery vehicles, such as Starship robots for high value goods or other deliveries requiring specific customer interaction? Or what happens if the customer is not there at the time their delivery is set to arrive?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So smart hubs are things that a lot of local authorities in the UK are looking at, for example. And we all know that the sort of the carbon impact of the constant redelivery attempt of that last mile delivery. So parcel lockers are obviously a way to combat that. Well, we're not doing parcels at the moment. We did trial it a long time ago. I guess the industry's moved on a lot since then. You could see a scenario where you've got smart hubs, right? I mean, this is probably more up Helen Street than mine, but you could see a scenario where you've got smart hubs with parcel lockers where the robots are able to be scheduled to take the parcels from the smart hub to the person's house at a time of their choosing. And if it's high value, you can always do age verification. We deliver age restricted goods in a number of areas, and we've got a very secure biometric age verification system that uses ID in the same way that your bank does, really. So, you could absolutely see a situation where as part of a multimodal delivery solution, this could properly work.
Helen?
Yeah, it would, because we do have some problems, especially with apartments, that parcels will get delivered and left and then stolen. It's really quite a large problem so I would see this as a potential solution, having those smart hubs and then the robots being, a part of that solution to combat that as well.
Great. Okay, and we have another question. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name because I'm sure I will mess it up. This question is, I think it is essential to facilitate seamless movement on sidewalks and within buildings for the robots. Are there any precedents for aligning the Building Act with the Road Traffic Act according to traditional classifications? AMRs are subject to the Building Act, whereas delivery robots are subject to the Road Traffic Act, but now the public needs to adopt both.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly interesting future-focused question, isn't it? Because we've been actually speaking to a developer. They said to us, how do we integrate your technology into our new build infrastructure? And that's a really exciting question. And it's not, and that's, in some ways, that's not a direct answer to the question, because that's not about regulation. That's about how you just practically do it, I guess. So I don't know who asked the question. It might be interesting. I'm not quite sure where you're coming from on that, is whether there is a need for regulatory alignment, or whether it's just town and city planning and developer planning that you could do it. My kind of question around it was just that, how do you future-proof that? Because tech is moving so quickly. So you can plan in terms of, you can plan spatially, but how do you plan for the actual, I don't know whether it's, we've got wireless charging now that we've developed. So how do you plan for that infrastructure? We've actually made ours so that we can install it pretty much anywhere, to be honest, our wireless charging, but it's, yeah, how you plan for that change and constant evolution of tech in the context of buildings, I guess. So I'd be interested for whoever asked the question, if they've got a follow-up to that, because it's a very interesting point.
Yeah. Helen, did you have anything on that in terms of the Building Act and the Road Traffic Acts?
Well, again, this comes in the UK, it comes from central government in terms of the planning framework and national planning framework, and then the you know, the kind of the laws that surround the highways and transportation as well. I mean, so it's very difficult, especially with the built environment. As Lisa says, you can plan things in, but they might, especially with how tech is moving on, some quite quickly become redundant, and then it's about retrofitting. And so it is about future proofing, and it's very difficult when the built environment, when you're actually, and so we're very focused on at the moment of buildings that can be remodeled quite. We don't do that in the UK. I know in the US that it's much more. My aunt and uncle live in Minnesota, and remodeling like the entire house is quite common, whereas we don't. You know, some of our buildings have been here for like hundreds of years. So that whole concept about buildings being able to evolve in their lifetime and change their uses and things is something that we're very interested at the moment, especially with all the challenges that we're facing around climate change, and future-proofing for resilience for that as well. So it is a really interesting question. And again, our roads for decades have just been dominated by the car, and now it's really quite difficult to get that perception changed that actually we're all road users, whether we're a pedestrian or a cyclist or a robot or a car driver, bus driver. So we have quite narrow roads, so fitting all those people in safely is really, really difficult, and legislating for that is very difficult. I think the legislation that nearest fits the robot is from 18, what, Lisa?
1835 Highways Act. Yeah, that's what we get quoted.
Which doesn't do us a lot of good, really, but that's the nearest law that we've got. So yeah, it's a huge piece of work, you know, writing our laws to accommodate things that are coming very fast and quick and will change very quickly in the next few years.
So you're competing with donkeys and horses.
Yes,
and carriages.
absolutely. And carriages, yeah.
I'm going to jump to one last
way,
question from somebody who hasn't had their question answered yet. So Ravi Babulai says, can we discuss for a moment mass adoption of robotics and the safety concerns this brings? Not all emergent companies may be as well equipped as Starship, from mechanical failure to cybersecurity threats. How does government and regulation view these issues as AMRs fill our streets and shopping plazas?
They've got to set a baseline. Right, it comes back to the last question in a way. There needs to be a baseline of what the expectation of each national government is. What is the minimum standard that you expect for your citizens to experience from devices and vehicles that have these? And that is the responsibility of regulators, that they need to look at that and put that in place. I mean, I think coming back to the last question, you need to do that in such a way that is common sense and practical. Now, the reason that the 1835 Highways Act is problematic is that In the UK, we have a tendency to specify every single little thing on the face of a bill, and sometimes we create powers to change it later, sometimes we don't. As it happened in 1835, they didn't think to build in any powers to legislate down the line for autonomous robots. I mean, why would they? So, you know, it needs to be a baseline of what can be expected and what national governments expect from people, but then it also needs to be flexible enough that the government of the day can quite easily change that as technology advances. And that's not necessarily because we want that as the benefit of industry. I'm in a weird place of arguing for more regulation for business, which is usually the opposite of what people are arguing for. But it is because, look at stuff around generative AI now. We're in a slightly different space to that, but no, the government isn't keeping up with it, and it's actually just so far behind in terms of where we are. And we don't even know the regulation that's passed today for generative AI there'll be a completely different need tomorrow. So baseline, but flexible enough for the common sense approach that allows you to update it, a lot like the Finns have in Finland.
All right, well, I'm going to hand it back over to Bern. He has one final question for our panelists, and then we will wrap up by 11 a.m. our time. So over to you, Bern.
Thank you. And thank the audience for their questions. And thank you, Helen and Lisa, for everything tonight. I want to ask one last question, a comment from each of you is kind of a summary question is, so what is the most important thing that you would like all the people on this call to take away from today? What are the key lessons that you want those people to take back to their jobs or their work, their company or their governments?
I think it'd be remiss of me not to talk about governments, wouldn't it? Really, I mean, given I'm public affairs, I think the takeaway from this for me is that governments should be having responsible regulation around this, and you do that because you want to promote the safety of the people in your communities, but also because you want that investment and innovation in your communities. Good regulation for responsible companies is essential, and it doesn't just force behavior. We're behaving in that way anyway. It will help generate income and investment and create jobs in local areas, and I think that's a really important point to make to regulators. And then for people in the industry, the most important thing is that if your robot sings, everybody likes it more.
That should be part of, they're going to regulate the song they sing.
No, I think that's one of those baseline standards, but that's one of those baseline standards. Yeah, common sense, flexible approach.
I'm going to add that to the international standard. Let me know what songs you want in there. Helen, would love to hear your comment as well.
I'm going to use that phrase that Lisa used earlier on. Work with your communities, work with people, don't do things to them. We employ that in Leeds, at Leeds City Council. We employ that across all our different directorates. You need to work with the communities, do proper consultation, listen to people, listen to their, no matter how. I had one gentleman email who was a former primary school head teacher who he didn't live in the trial area. He just didn't like the idea. And he wanted to go and live on an island where there weren't robots. And I wasn't facetious enough to point out that we do live on an island, but work with people. They've got very real fears. Those fears might be founded, but if you've got good, reputable, responsible partners, which we have in Starship and Co-op, then be brave. And that's what I would say. This is great technology if it's done right, and it brings a whole new level of innovation and economic benefits and climate benefits, but also fun and joy to the world. And the world's missing that a little bit. And so when it sings Last Christmas to you, when you get your Christmas delivery, enjoy it. What's not to like?
Thank you. So I think that's it for us. Lee, you want to wrap up? And it was, again, I want to thank the panelists very, very much. It's been a very wonderful session.
Thank you. So that was a very in-depth Q&A. Thank you to our audience for asking those great questions, and thank you to our panelists for your wonderful and thoughtful responses. I will be taking the questions. There were a couple that we didn't get to, and I will forward them to Lisa and Helen and see if we can get some answers. I'll be writing a blog post about this webinar and also posting the recording on our YouTube channel. So we'll be sending that information out to everybody who registered. I know there were a number of people who signed up, wanted to attend, but could not attend. And even some people from Australia, I'm sure that was their intention was to like listen to the recording the whole time, because I don't know what time it is there, but I'm sure it's middle of the morning for them. So thank you again, everybody. I do want to remind people about our special offer. So the first 15 people to sign up for our discovery workshop will receive a free copy of the discovery guide. And if you become a member, you also get a discount on the discovery guide and any of our workshop attendance. So thank you for that. And I'm going to provide you with the links here. And we will just take a moment now to wrap up. You can turn your cameras on, say thank you, ask questions, but the official session is over and you're welcome to drop off, and we'll stop recording now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.